Hello, I'm Karen Young, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar this lunchtime, in which we're going to look at the changes accountancy and tax apprenticeships have recently undergone, with significant updates to funding, delivery and design. The following webinar, I hope, will help you navigate the changes and seize the opportunity to look at further development for your teams. So thank you all for attending. Before we begin, please remember that if at any time you have questions for myself or for our expert speakers, please do submit these during the Q&A using the Q&A function on your screen, and we will cover these questions at the end of the presentations. By way of a brief introduction, I'm the UK Director of Hayes Accountancy and Finance, which provides recruitment support and consultancy to hundreds of organisations across the country. For over 50 years, Hayes has been finding the best jobs for talented people like yourselves, as well as finding talent for you. And today, just to put things in context, we secure a job for an accountancy and finance professional in the UK almost about every 10 minutes. So lots of happy people whilst we conduct this webinar today. You may also have seen that we produce a range of reports and guides to help advise your recruitment decisions, to help you benchmark your salary and benefits offerings, and to help you attract and retain the best talent. And these include things like the Hayes Salary and Recruiting Guides, Trends Guide, the What Workers Want report, and a range of DNA reports, DNA of a finance director, DNA of a partner, DNA of a credit manager, DNA of a head of tax and treasury, as well as a whole range of thought leadership and blogs. I'm delighted to be joined today by Cassandra MacDonald and Matt Rawlins from Kaplan, who are experts in their field, and they will be covering the latest updates to accountancy standards, including the new Level 7 Professional Accountant Apprenticeship program and how it might affect you. They'll also help you make sense of the 20% off the job rules and gain clarity on what you can and can't include, and help you understand the new eligibility rules, including what to do if part of your team is transferring partway through an existing professional qualification, and how apprenticeship training can enrich your development programs in your own organisations. So first of all, let's just begin as an introduction with a look at some of the challenges that you may be facing when it comes to your talent pipeline and the skills of your finance workforce. In the Hayes UK Salary and Recruiting Trends 2018 guide, finance employers told us that they were struggling to find the skills that they needed to achieve their business objectives. In fact, over 3/4, 76%, as you can see in front of you, of accountancy and finance employers tell us that a shortage of suitable applicants is their top recruitment challenge that they anticipate for this year ahead. So it's loud and clear that skills are an important topic, and we need to consider how to develop them from the ground up and future-proof our businesses. Looking more closely at the skills most in demand, and this is what accountancy and finance employers told us in our survey, finance skills were obviously the most in demand, but followed by leadership and management and more technical skills. And of course, as you'd expect, we can see data and analytics creeping in there as well. And for those employers looking for skill sets that typically come with experience, looking to other approaches to hiring is pretty pertinent during skills short times. So, for example, hiring temporary, contract or interim workers may hold the answer to filling skills gaps in the short term in order to meet peaks in demands, but there are other more forward-thinking methods and also ones that will work for the longer term. As you can see in front of you, the use of temps does remain a popular method of filling skills gaps from accountancy and finance employers across private sector, professional services and public services. But we have also seen an increase in the recruitment of apprenticeships as a means of overcoming immediate skills shortages, or certainly an intent to recruit apprentices. But I do think it has been a little slow on the uptake, and really, quite frankly, that's why we're here today. I think it's also a pertinent time to add that accountancy and finance employees in our survey, and this is employees, told us how important career path, personal development, learning and development is to them, aside from money and salary, when deciding whether to stay in a job or leave it for a new job. And with over half of accountancy and finance employees telling us that they may consider moving jobs during 2018, I truly believe investment in people, whether that is new hires, whether it's new apprentices, or whether it's your existing people, is really key. And it's these apprenticeships that Cassandra and Matt will now look at in further detail. So I'll pass over to Cassandra from Kaplan to help to navigate through. Thanks, Cassandra.
Hi, Karen. Thanks very much. So hello, everybody. As Karen said, my name's Cassandra MacDonald, and I head up the Client Solutions team for apprenticeships within Kaplan. So there are two main elements of my role. The first is to look at new apprenticeship standards that are being released, and we hear that the, not relevant necessarily to this call, but the executive MBA apprenticeship has actually been signed off for approval today, so that's good news. So thinking about the different standards and which of them Kaplan will be delivering and then what they're going to look like. And secondly, my role is to work with employers such as yourselves to really make sure that apprenticeships are working for you. So look at the programs and look at how they're going to fit for your organisation, which is absolutely one of the key drivers behind these new apprenticeship standards. And specifically with regards to accountancy, I've been involved in all of the trailblazer employer and provider groups developing each of the new standards that we'll talk about today. So that's been about 5 years really in the making, and I've been very involved in what those standards are going to look like and the assessment methodology. So hopefully I have some insight to share with you on our call. Just a brief overview in terms of who Kaplan are, just in case you haven't heard of us. We've been providing professional vocational training for over 30 years, and I think what's so exciting about the new Level 7 apprenticeship in particular is that it really gives us the opportunity to combine, two of our really strong areas of expertise. So firstly, with regards to professional accountancy training, and secondly, with regards to vocational training. So this is really bringing those two together and bringing, if you like, professional qualifications into the apprenticeship space. So we train over 45,000 students annually, and we have over 500 specialists and experienced tutors engaged in delivering our professional qualifications and vocational programs. And there are various other accolades that you can see on the screen. I'm sure the slides will be shared with you, so I won't go through all of those, but hopefully that just gives you a little bit of a flavour as to who we are. So before I start talking about the accountancy apprenticeships in more detail, we thought it might just be useful to give a brief overview in terms of where apprenticeships are at in 2018, so not necessarily just for finance and accountancy, but in terms of any type of apprenticeship you might want to engage in, sort of what the key elements are that you need to be considering and what some of the government policy is. One of the important things to point out is that apprenticeships are a devolved policy area. So what we mean by that is that each of the devolved nations, so England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, are able to make up their own policy with regards to skills and apprenticeships. So everything that we will be covering on the webinar today will be England, will only apply in England. There are separate rules in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, one of which is that Level 7 isn't actually recognised there yet. So, much of what we're going to talk about is not actually possible in those devolved nations. So just a caveat before we start, we probably need a webinar all on its own to discuss apprenticeships in those devolved nations. So it does get a little bit complicated. So in terms of England, the government has a target of creating 3 million new apprenticeship starts by 2020. So this is a well-publicised target. It was in the 2015 David Cameron manifesto, and it was retained by Theresa May last year. You may have heard in the press that, new apprenticeship starts, and it relates back to what Karen was saying as well, are actually struggling at the moment. So since the introduction of the levy and the new standards, starts have actually fallen, and there is some concern that maybe this target might be missed. But anyway, it remains very much a target to try to get to these new starts over the course of this Parliament, so by 2020. And then over the last year, a new Institute for Apprenticeships has been created. So this is in effect a new government department which has been created specifically to oversee the quality of apprenticeships and the range of new apprenticeship standards. And they've already made their mark really. So certainly the creation of the Institute for Apprenticeships did slow down the approval of the Level 7 Accountancy Apprenticeship Standard. So many of you may be aware that we were waiting an awfully long time for approval for that, and that was due to the fact that this IFA was created, and they did have lots of questions, and mainly because they want to try and introduce more consistency in terms of the standard approval process. So standards then are brand new. They've been around for, well, brand new, they've been around for about 3 years, but certainly new in the context of sort of old apprenticeship frameworks. And one of the key features of standards is that they need to be based around a job role. So if you do look at the different standards that have been approved, each of them relates specifically to a job role. So rather than just saying accountancy or business admin or something that's quite broad, it will be professional accounting technician or team leader or HR consultant. So there will be a job role, that needs to be recognised, and then that apprenticeship is designed around that specific occupation. And then we're looking at the knowledge, skills and behaviours that are needed to perform competently in that job role. And that's been the employer's role really in the creation of these new standards, is to really think about that job role and to really think about what the individuals need when they're qualified in that occupation. What are the key knowledge, skills and behaviours we want them to be demonstrating? And it's those then that form part of this standard. So anybody that's familiar with the sort of old style apprenticeships, so the old MVQs, which were very assessment heavy, so, lots of portfolios, this sort of images of assessors coming out, carrying reams and reams of paper and bags and what have you, and that's very much gone under this new regime. So rather than ongoing assessment, apprenticeships are now following the trends in education, which is for endpoint assessment. So anybody with, sons or daughters or nieces, doing GCSEs or A-levels at the moment might be aware that, coursework's been scrapped, for example, and that final grade just depends on those final exams. And effectively, that's the way apprenticeships has gone as well. So there's no ongoing assessment anymore. It really does all depend on this endpoint assessment, which is carried out by an independent assessor at the very end of the apprenticeship programme. Again, I mentioned the Master's MBA apprenticeship, which was signed off today. So that's something that's very exciting and very new with apprenticeships as well. That again, traditionally apprenticeships were seen at sort of lower levels, if you like, so more equivalent to GCSEs or A-levels. But now they're going all the way from a sort of level 2, which is an entry level, right the way through to a level 7, which is the equivalent of a master's degree. So you don't actually necessarily get a master's degree, but it's the equivalent status. And again, something that's brand new, and traditionally people thought that apprenticeships might only be for new hires. Again, that's never necessarily been the case, but it certainly isn't the case now. So apprenticeships are open to everybody, whether they are new to your organisation or indeed an experienced staff member that has been there 30 years. And I was with an employer recently, talking about a team leader apprenticeship, where somebody's coming onto that programme that has literally been with their employer for 25 years and is now embarking on this apprenticeship programme. So it's pretty much open to anybody, unless they've already studied that particular qualification or an equivalent qualification. And again, within apprenticeships, one of the slightly frustrating things is that there's lots of grey areas. This would certainly be one of them in terms of, what counts as an equivalent qualification. So to some extent, a degree of judgment's used. And again, that's where training providers such as Kaplan are here to help you. But for example, if somebody's already studied a master's in accountancy, it would be hard to argue that, doing a level 7 master's equivalent in accountancy, would be significantly new training. If somebody's done a master's in history, however, that's completely unrelated. So an apprenticeship in accountancy, would be something they'd be able to undergo. And then Karen's alluded to this, we do have this 20% off the job training, which is now a requirement of all apprenticeships. And we'll cover that in a bit more detail in a few more slides. But certainly a very hot topic. And just quickly then, so in terms of who can actually do an apprenticeship, so some of this we've covered on the other slide, but just to give you an overview, anybody can do an apprenticeship as long as they have the right to work in the UK and they've been ordinarily resident here for the last 3 years. There's no maximum age limit anymore in terms of who can do an apprenticeship, but there is a minimum age of 16. So they need to be 16 in the academic year that they start their apprenticeship with you. Something else which is worth taking into consideration is that, again, often employers took apprentices on a 12-month contract, which is absolutely fine. So on a specific contract for 12 months, and then it was decided whether or not that would be renewed, whether that job role, was still needed. Now the 12-month specific contract might be a problem because apprentices do need to have enough time to actually finish their apprenticeship program. And all apprenticeships now need to last a minimum of effectively 12 months and 1 week. So they need to be given at least that amount of time to actually complete their apprenticeship. And if, for example, they're on an 18-month apprenticeship, then they need to be on an 18-month contract. So you can still use apprenticeship contracts. You just need to make sure that the length of that apprenticeship contract equates with the length of time it's expected to complete that apprenticeship program. Again, we talked about the devolved nations issue. In order to qualify for an English apprenticeship, they need to spend 50% of their time working in England. And again, that's something that you need to demonstrate at the start of the apprenticeship. So if somebody might be based in Cardiff, for instance, but, a significant amount of the time they'll spend over in Bristol, and we can demonstrate that that is around 50%, then they could be eligible to do an English apprenticeship. They can't do 2 apprenticeships at the same time. And something else which is, very, very relevant to level 7 is with regards to the financial contributions. So anybody on an apprenticeship now is not allowed to be asked by the employer to contribute financially to any costs that are necessary as part of that apprenticeship. And why that's so relevant with regards to level 7 is that typically employers are very used to asking those that might be studying for a professional qualification to pay back any of the costs of that qualification that they've incurred if that individual chooses to leave their employer, and you're not allowed to do that any longer. Resit fees as well are something that you wouldn't be able to ask your apprentices to contribute towards. So it's just something to bear in mind if you are considering using the level 7 apprenticeship. You can't ask your apprentices to contribute financially to any costs of that training. And we've already discussed the existing members of staff and graduates, absolutely fine, as long as they're receiving significant new training. Okay, so that's just a brief overview in terms of the apprenticeship landscape and eligibility. We'll now move on just to have a little more look at accountancy apprenticeships and level 7 in particular. So on the slide here, this is just to show you the full family, if you like, of accountancy apprenticeships. So we go right from the start. So this is effectively the pre-employment or the pre-apprenticeship phase, which some individuals might go on to, which is a traineeship. So this is something that Kaplan, for instance, would offer. And these are where individuals maybe need a little bit more training and help before they're ready either for an apprenticeship or to move on to further education. So this is a program where they get lots of skills training, work experience, really to get them ready for that next step. Within accountancy then, we have 4 levels of, typical apprenticeship. We start with level 2. Level 2 is a bit of a funny one at the moment because we don't have a new standard available yet for level 2. There's a long history behind that, which I won't bore you with now. But anyway, where we stand at the minute, the level 2 would be studied under an old apprenticeship framework. And it's not really anything to worry about too much. It just means that there's no endpoint assessment, and effectively you just study for the AAT foundation qualification as part of that apprenticeship. It does mean, however, that the funding, so the government wants to try to push people onto standards and has therefore slashed the funding which is available for framework apprenticeships. So it's a very low level of funding at £2,000. So typically you might be asked for a contribution on top of that funding level. There is a new standard which is in development for level 2, so the AAT, CAPLAN, and many employers are, working away as we speak on trying to get that standard ready and available, so it effectively joins in with the rest of the accountancy apprenticeship family. We'd expect that probably to be ready hopefully by the end of the year, if not a little bit sooner. And definitely any employers that might be interested in being involved in that, I know the AAT would love to hear from you. Moving on then to our standards. So these are the apprenticeships now which do sit within the new standards. So we have level 3, which is the assistant accountant. This is where you would study the AAT advanced qualification, and the funding band for that is at 9,000. So we haven't really gone in, with this webinar into a huge amount about the levy or how funding works, but just very, very briefly, each apprenticeship framework or standard is placed into a funding band by the Institute for Apprenticeships. So there are 15 funding bands, and each approved standard or framework gets placed into one of them. And then effectively the maximum amount you can either draw out of your levy or have funded by the government is, the funding band that apprenticeship's been placed in. So level 3 and level 4 have both been placed in that £9,000 band. So that's a maximum that could come out of your levy for that particular apprenticeship standard. So assistant accountant, AAT advanced. When we move to level 4 then, we have the professional accountant or tax technician, and there's a range of different qualifications that you can study. The level 4 is the equivalent to the first year of university. So we usually say an individual maybe with, really good academic background, very, very strong A-levels, that has maybe made the decision not to go to university but to study for an apprenticeship, they are likely to, do well starting at a level 4 apprenticeship. And you can do the AAT professional and then also move on to do the first level of CIMA, ACCA, CFAB, which is the first level of ACA, or indeed do the full ATT qualification. And then we get to the one that we're going to be focusing on a little bit more specifically on this webinar, which is your level 7. So if anybody from the ATT is watching this, I do apologise. This slide should say professional accounting accounting or taxation professional. So we tend to sort of think of ourselves as one big happy family and sometimes forget to include tax when we're writing these. So I do apologise. That should say, like I say, accountancy and taxation professional. And indeed, you can study the full CTA qualification as part of that. And then also the ICAW, the CIMA, or the ACCA. So these are the full professional qualifications that can now be studied as part of an apprenticeship. And if we're thinking about the funding bands, then it is the £21,000 funding band which this apprenticeship has been placed in. So I'm now going to focus on that level 7 apprenticeship in a bit more detail. So the apprenticeship is split into 2 main phases. We have the on-programme assessment phase and then the end-point assessment phase. Now, in terms of actually passing the apprenticeship, the only thing that matters is the end-point assessment phase. The on-programme phase, then, is where an individual is gathering all of that knowledge, skills and behaviours in order to pass the end-point assessment. Now, there are definitely, some differences between studying the professional qualification through an apprenticeship rather than just doing it as a qualification only. But in my experience of working with 27 other apprenticeship standards, I would say that level 7 is probably the easiest of all the apprenticeship standards that we work with. And this is because it so closely aligns with that professional qualification. So there's actually very little additional work that does need to be done as part of a level 7 apprenticeship over and above what you were already doing as part of a professional qualification. Yes, there are other differences, such as the 20% off the job, such as not being allowed to ask an individual to financially contribute towards their apprenticeship. But in terms of what's actually done as part of that programme, there are very, very little differences between doing it as an apprenticeship and doing it as a professional qualification. So effectively, on programme, what your individual would be doing is doing the exams from their chosen qualification, so whether that's CTA, ACCA, ICAW or CIMA. And then also we want to see them keeping this training log to show that the skills and behaviours which are part of the standard are effectively being met. So they're being given the opportunity to demonstrate those skills and behaviours whilst they're on the apprenticeship programme. Now again, if we look at the ICAW, CIMA, ACCA for instance, they're already asking individuals to do that. So, you know, it's common in terms of actually getting professionally qualified to have to show training logs, to have to demonstrate where you've met certain skills and behaviours. So again, having to do that as part of an apprenticeship shouldn't be too big a leap from what somebody's been doing before. Something that might be new is the regular talent coach check-in, so we will move on to this, but this is just if somebody is on an apprenticeship, then because this is deemed to be government money that's being spent on them, we do need to make sure that that individual is progressing. So as the training provider, CAPLAN has a responsibility whilst that individual is on the apprenticeship programme to show that they're actually making progress. So we do need to make sure that we're keeping a check on that. But again, that's relatively light touch in terms of what that meeting needs to look like. And then when we get to endpoint assessment, there are two forms of endpoint assessment, which again is a government requirement. And the first one is the case study. So again, this is nothing new. You know, in order to get professionally qualified, a student has to sit a case study anyway, and they'll sit exactly the same case study they would have to sit if they were doing the professional qualification. And ACCA is bringing in a case study. So I know typically they haven't had one, but as part of their new syllabus, we will be having a case study. So again, that closely aligns with that professional qualification. And then the big thing that's different, I guess, is this project report. And again, that sounds quite scary. It sounds like this big, huge project that somebody needs to write. In actual fact, it's not. It's really then just a reflection of the skills and behaviours that somebody has demonstrated whilst they're on the apprenticeship. So yes, it is around 4,000 words that, you know, effectively they need to be looking to write. There's typically going to be about 4 scenarios that they're going to be asked to reflect back on. You know, but it's not this sort of big, huge project. And again, as long as they're keeping their training logs up to date, they're thinking about those skills and behaviours, then this shouldn't hopefully be too big an additional piece of work that somebody has to do, you know, when they do get to the end of the apprenticeship. But it's important to stress that because this is probably the biggest difference in terms of actual work completed is having to write this project report. And then I did say I would cover off the 20% off the job, so we're very happy to share these slides, and we have them worked out for all the qualifications we deliver as well, indeed all the different apprenticeship standards. So the example here is the ACCA, but to be fair, this works for any level 7 qualification that you might be studying. And what we've tried to do then is effectively break this down between the training that you as the employer might be delivering and then the training that we as the external training provider might be delivering as well. So what 20% off the job basically means, and again the off the job title is quite unhelpful in my view because it implies that you physically need to be away from your desk in order to undertake this training, and that is absolutely not the case. What the 20% means is that 20% of the time on programme needs to be spent in training and development. So that absolutely can be training that you do at your desk. It could be internal training, that you're offering to individuals. Certainly it can be professional qualification training. It just needs to be some form of training and development. So for level 7 then, if we took a typical 36-month, 3 years programme, you would be looking at 945 hours to fill in terms of training and development to meet this 20% off the job requirement. And this does need to be done during work hours as well. So if you are asking somebody to do training, you know, effectively antisocially, the time would have to be given back in lieu. So effectively, in terms of what we as the training provider would be providing, so if we look down the CAPLAN column, we've got development day workshops, which I will speak to you about in a moment. And then you've got the bulk of that 20% being made up by the professional exam training. So if we're excluding the case study, it's around 625 hours for the professional exam qualification training, and then around about 11 days for the case study. So you're really looking there at, you know, a huge majority of that program being made up with that professional qualification training. We also do have some e-learning modules which are part of our program, which again I'll come on to in a moment, and you know they can contribute towards the off-the-job training as well, as with some of the coach support that would be offered. And then what I'm encouraging employers to really think about is the training that you provide, because the more of this you do yourselves as part of your sort of day-to-day activities, then the more easily you're going to meet this 20%. So think about any type of induction you might be offering, and then absolutely consider any internal training. And CAPLAN are here to help you put this together as well. So, you know, we can sit down with you and build up this sort of 20% overview. So any type of internal training that you do, whether they be workshops, webinars, you know, e-learning modules, anything that you might provide, then make sure we include that. And the other thing to look at then is any type of one-to-one learning support. So whether that's through appraisals, whether it's through regular one-to-ones, and whether it's through any sort of training that you're actually giving to somebody practically in the workplace. So in an accountancy environment, you know, if you're showing somebody how to use a new accountancy package, if you're maybe helping somebody audit a different area of the balance sheet, then all of that counts towards training, and you know, as we've said, should absolutely be included in this overview. So lots of ways to make that up, but again, it's a very hot topic and we don't believe this is going away either. The IFA, the government, any conference you go to where this is challenged, you know, they do come back and say they're really committed to making this a part of, you know, their apprenticeship policy. So it is something that is worth considering, but I don't think, you know, if you engage in training and development anyway, then, you know, we don't believe you have anything to really worry about with, you know, as a result of this policy area. Okay, so I'm nearly there before I hand over to Matt, a few more slides, and just looking then at the delivery. So again, I won't go through this in a huge amount of detail. We're happy to share these with you, but at CAPLAN we've put together for all of our apprenticeship standards example milestone maps. And what these are designed to do is just show you the whole life of the apprenticeship program and what you might be doing on a month-by-month basis. So mapping out the skills and behaviours that need to be demonstrated, looking at the development days that we might offer, and then again the professional qualification that sits within that apprenticeship as well. And then if you come to the end of the apprenticeship, so what's in green, showing how the endpoint assessment, where that would fit in with the overall programme. And then breaking those down into a little bit more detail, we have the skills and behaviours. So I mentioned these briefly when we were talking about the 20%. CAPLAN has really embraced the new apprenticeship standards in terms of making sure that our skills and behaviours training is as prominent as the professional qualification training, if as the employer you'd like to use us for this. So we have a suite of e-learning modules, so there's roughly around 30 per apprenticeship standard, and these have all been mapped closely into the standard. So they're designed to be interactive, there's video content on there, there are short questions that students can answer, and they're really then looking to, you know, help students think about where they could be demonstrating these skills and behaviours in the workplace. Topics can be tailored as well, so even though we select 30, we've got a bank of 200, so if somebody's got a really specific training need, then we can always look to bespoke the modules that we offer to that individual, or indeed to each employer that we work with. Something that we're really excited about are our development day workshops. So we have an expert leadership and management team within Kaplan, and this team then has again looked through the apprenticeship standards and selected some of the core, in their experience, skills and behaviours that we could really focus on and that would work really, really well in a workshop environment. So these are one-day, really engaging events, you know, lots of interactive group participation, individual feedback, delivered by our expert trainers, with the intention to get the individual again to go back in the workplace, into the workplace, and really think about where they're demonstrating these skills and behaviours and how they can improve in terms of their demonstration as well. And finally, you know, because one of the problems with training is it's absolutely great, but just because you've been on a development day workshop doesn't mean that you're then an expert in communicating and influencing. So, you know, within the apprenticeship program, you then have to go back into the workplace and actually find real life examples of where you have, you know, demonstrated exceptional communication to then write about in the endpoint assessment in the project report at the end. So that's really the role of the talent coach, is then to, you know, meet with a student, you know, over a 3-year program, probably about once every 6 months, you know, check in with them, making sure they're demonstrating those skills and behaviours, identifying any potential gaps, and ensuring that somebody, when they get to endpoint assessment, is fully prepared to pass it. Okay, so that's it for me. So I'm going to hand over to Matt just to talk through our technical qualification offering.
Thanks, Cassandra. Just as a way of introduction, I am a client director at Kaplan, so I support our clients in the South and Southeast regions on all aspects of finance training, including apprenticeships. I then also help to advise businesses who don't currently study with Kaplan on their training programs and advise them on how Kaplan is able to support them. So to go through how we can support your students when they're actually at Kaplan, the great thing about the apprenticeships is that the majority of our study methods are available. So here you can see the 4 different study methods that Kaplan offer. And of those 4 methods, the first 3, so classroom, live online, and on demand, are available through the apprenticeship offering. At the moment, the distance learning package isn't available due to our ability to track how the student is studying and ensuring that they are actually putting in the time that they need to meet the apprenticeship requirements. So just to give you a quick summary, starting with the classroom, the traditional classroom where they attend one of our 24 locations. These are dependent on subject, so some of them will be on weekly classes, some of them will be in block release, and it really does depend on the subject that's being studied. But we have full timetables available, and they would come along and they join in the same class that the non-apprenticeships will be doing. So there is no difference between the classes that an apprentice and a non-apprentice will be attending. We've then got the live online courses. So these courses are online courses, but they are live. Therefore, they will see a tutor in front of them. They will log in at a set time, and they will be able to ask questions live to that tutor. So our live online courses are very similar to the classroom, but help those that have restrictions in terms of travel. So they are still able to attend these live online classes. Finally, the last one that is covered by the apprenticeship is our new on-demand courses. At the moment, these on-demand courses are available for CIMA and AAT, and we hope to introduce ACCA some point at the back end of the year, hopefully September. And our on-demand courses are completely flexible in terms of when the students study. So they can study 15 minutes here and there. You can book them an hour at a time, 2 hours at a time. It's completely flexible on how they can study. The on-demand courses are accessed through our My Kaplan website and are made up of a combination of questions, short sort of 2 to 15 minute videos, and text, all combined in a program that the students work through at their own pace. Again, the great thing about apprenticeships is that the students can mix and match between those study methods. So they don't have to just do classroom or just do on-demand. They can pick and choose the study method depending on the subject they're studying at the time. So quite often, case studies are always done in the classroom, but some of the objective test modules might be chosen to do live online or on demand. With all of our study methods, we offer a full range of support. So you can access the online recordings through the on-demand if you are doing live online, classroom, or the on-demand product. So that online content is available for all. And as well as the tutor support, all of the students will have access to our Kaplan academic support. So our Kaplan academic support is a tutor team there to support the students when they need it. It's available in the evenings, bank holidays and weekends, and your students are able to get in touch with Kaplan via a live chat, request a callback and email functions. So all of the different study methods are covered by the apprenticeship standard, meaning that actually it is quite flexible in terms of ensuring the apprentice works around your business and your busy terms. Just to touch on that, we do offer weekend and evening courses, but as Cassandra previously mentioned, if you are asking an apprentice to attend evening and weekend courses, then you would have to give time off in lieu for those courses. That's it in terms of the study options. So I believe we're going to go to a questions and answer session.
Great. Thank you, Matt and Cassandra, for taking us through that. So we have got some questions coming through. Just a reminder, if you've got questions you want to pose as a result of listening so far, to use the Q&A function, so those can come through to us. So I'll read them out. We've got a question here from James. Would giving a member of staff 1 day off a week to do their qualification in a distance learning scheme count for the 20% off work rule, or would it have to be in a classroom environment, please? To either of you.
Yeah. Sorry, Matt.
Go for it, Kathy.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. The 20%, as if it's in a distance learning scheme, would be okay. The 1 day off a week is what really counts. The only thing that you do have to have is some type of face-to-face training. So as long as a talent coach or there was some type of live training that was going on, so whether that be through a talent coach visit or whether they attended a development day workshop, for instance, then it's no concern with the rest of the time being spent in a distance learning scheme. And again, if you were given 1 day a week off, then that's absolutely fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Question from John regarding training logs, say, for example, for ICAW. Do students have to duplicate in another format what they currently do in their training file ladders?
I can take that one. Absolutely not, no. So we're working very hard to make sure that there's no duplication. Certainly, you know, within my team, duplication is a dirty word. We don't want to, you know, get anybody to duplicate anything that they're already doing. So anything that they are putting into those training ladders, we would map across in terms of our own training log, for example. So there's no need for any type of duplication there.
Great, okay, thank you. The one here from Caroline. So could you do the CTA, i.e. level 7, if you've already got, say, CIMA or ACCA at a level 7? Would that be too close to home?
It's again in a slightly grey area, this one. So if you've studied CIMA or ACCA to a level 7 apprenticeship, then no, you couldn't then go on and do the CTA as an apprenticeship because you've already got that apprenticeship effectively. If you studied CIMA or ACCA through a professional qualification route, which is more likely given that level 7 was only signed off in November, then what we'd want to see is that substantive training need. So you'd really want to show that we would be looking for somebody, for example, actually changing job role or taking on a new job role where it was absolutely essential that they needed that training that the CTA could provide. And indeed, remember, it's not just the professional qualification that makes up the apprenticeship, it's the other skills and behaviours as well. So again, we'd need to see that, you know, through the other skills and behaviours training, there was that substantive need there. So really, we would be looking for somebody, you know, actually having to change job role or taking on new responsibilities as part of their job role, rather than just wanting to get the CTA qualification because it's now available under a funded route.
Okay, thank you. Question from Emma. So can an apprentice transfer between employers and continue the same qualification or apprenticeship?
Yes, they can. Yeah, absolutely. So it is possible for somebody to carry their apprenticeship with them if they moved to a different employer.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing, just to pick up on that, just to be a little bit pedantic, is it would depend on effectively how much funding was left. So if somebody had been on for 3 years and maybe failed lots and lots of exams, then possibly it wouldn't be the case they could take the apprenticeship with them. But if they were progressing as they should be and just decided to sort of move roles, then absolutely they could continue.
Okay, great, thank you. And another one here from Abby, which I can imagine might be quite a common question actually. So if someone was already part qualified ACCA, for example, from previous study, non-apprenticeship in a different company, joins an organisation and that organisation and line manager wants to offer an apprenticeship for ACCA for them to complete it, would the student need to start from the beginning? I guess this is this sort of slight duplication question again, or could they pick up and transfer into that apprenticeship? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Matt, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, happy to take that one. So yes, absolutely. With all of the qualifications, ACCA, ICAW, CIMA, we can transfer existing students, be that existing students with the company or students moving across from one company to another, assuming that they have a significant amount of the apprenticeship left to run, and that it's going to be relevant for them to do an apprenticeship, so that they still need to develop those skills and behaviours. So if, for example, with the ACCA, they were completing their final P papers, it probably wouldn't be appropriate to move them on to an apprenticeship. However, if they were perhaps still on their F papers partway through, still had a 1.5 years or 2 years to run, then definitely it would be able to move them across onto the apprenticeship.
Great, okay, thank you. Another one here, one for me actually, which is in your first slide, you mentioned a lack of suitable candidates was a big challenge for finance employers. So how can apprentices hope to fill such a gap? Well, there are obviously some job roles and skills that apprenticeships potentially may not be the right route to fill, but by adding support in at these levels, it can free existing staff up to take on more advanced responsibilities. And I think that would have a number of advantages in the short term, helping existing employees to have the freedom to take that career path and personal development that I mentioned at the start and progress their careers, but also filling skills shortages in, at an entry level end in the long term would help ensure an organisation has got a greater talent pool. I mean, today we've hosted a breakfast forum for finance leaders around the Reading and Thames Valley area, and obviously there's immense talk at the moment around AI, artificial intelligence, and robotics, and how this is going to be changing, is already changing the skill sets that's needed. And I think the skill sets that will develop for an apprentice, but also bringing an apprentice in on the more traditional routes like we've talked about today, and freeing existing staff up to then look at how they need to develop skill sets in slightly different directions for the future, to future-proof their own career and also that of the organisation that they work for is really key. And then in time they can then pass those skill sets on to the people that have completed their apprenticeships. I think that's really key. Sorry, I should ask Cassandra or Matt, would you add anything on that? No?
No.
No. And a really practical one here, just from someone saying, well, how does someone enrol? I suppose that's a key question. Maybe one for you, Cassandra. How do they actually enrol?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are a levy-paying employer, so you pay into the levy, then you will need a contract with us as your training provider, or indeed, whichever training provider you wanted to use. So that's, again, a government requirement to have that in place. So we'd need to just sort that out. But after that, it's very straightforward. So there is a slightly enhanced application pack to what somebody might need to have done historically, just because with it being an apprenticeship, again, there are certain, key data that we need to request, but we've slimmed it down as much as we possibly can. So it's a relatively straightforward application pack that somebody needs to fill in, and then we just get them going.
Great, sounds pretty straightforward. And then I think we did touch on this, but there's one here for you, Matt. Is there an age limit for apprentices, just to re-clarify that message?
Yeah, so definitely there is no age limit for apprentices. There is the minimum age limit, so they have to be older than 16. It is worth noting, though, that there are additional funding benefits of taking on somebody under the age of 19 and also somebody under the age of 25. So although apprenticeships are available for all, there's some additional cost benefits to the organisation for taking on apprentices under the age of 25 and then again under the age of 19.
Great, okay, thank you. So I think, let me just double check and refresh. I think that's all. Sorry, just one quick last question that's just come through as I refreshed. Is there any difference in the process for a current member of staff compared to, say, a new starter? I think that's probably referring to when you were talking about enrolment, Cassandra.
No, that isn't. So in terms of actually enrolling, that isn't, because we still need to capture that information from an existing member of staff that we probably wouldn't have captured ordinarily. So the process really remains the same. There might be a slightly different step in terms of if somebody is already studying through a qualification, for example, then we might just need to look at what they've already done and readjust the programme and the price. But in terms of new starters versus existing staff, absolutely no difference.
Great, okay, thank you. So I think that is now the close of the questions. So thank you, Cassandra and Matt, and I'm pretty sure both of you are on LinkedIn, and I'm sure if people want to find you and us directly, you can be put in touch with the appropriate teams. Thank you for everyone who has attended today. We will have recorded the session, so if you've got peers, colleagues, associates that you think might benefit from listening to this, and once you've got a copy of the recording, you want to forward that on to someone, please do feel free. And I hope the insight you've gained into apprenticeships has been useful for you, for your organisation, and I think really key, food for thought for your strategic workforce planning for an accountancy or a finance department. If you'd like to gain any wider insights about the accountancy and finance market and start benchmarking some of the salaries, our Salary and Recruiting Trends 2018 guide is still available to request, and all you need to do is go to hayes.co.uk/salary-guide to get started. I should also note, Cassandra, you noted that we've not gone into detail on the sort of the levy piece. We do have a previous resource that's recorded on our Hayes website under hayestalentsolutions.com/insights, and that's understanding the UK apprenticeship levy that was pre-recorded a little while ago. So if any of you are looking for further insight into that, I'd reference you to that material. But finally, I'd just like to again extend my thanks to Cassandra and Matt, our speakers, for their expert advice, and all of you for attending. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Karen.